I came home expecting to bury my uncle, not to fight for the land he'd spent his whole life protecting. The first thing waiting for me wasn't an old porch, or the smell of pine trees I remembered from childhood. It was a brand new steel gate welded across my own driveway with a bright orange notice that claimed I was trespassing on property controlled by an HOA I'd never agreed to join. Then the county sheriff showed up, looked me straight in the eye, and quietly admitted there wasn't much he could do. And that's when I realized this wasn't some neighborhood disagreement. Somebody had spent years building a lie, and somehow my family's ranch had become the only thing standing in its way. If you've ever had someone try to take what was rightfully yours just because they thought you wouldn't fight back, stay with me. I still can't believe how this ended, and honestly, I don't think the people in that valley saw it coming either. My name is Ethan Mercer, and until a few months ago I hadn't spent more than a weekend on Mercer Ridge in nearly 15 years. Life carried me away the way it does most people. College, work, a mortgage, endless meetings that somehow always felt more important than family until one phone call reminded me they never really were. My Uncle Walter passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning. He never married, never had children. He always joked that the ranch was enough family for one lifetime. Looking back now, I think he believed someone would eventually come home. He just hoped it would happen before strangers decided they owned everything he'd spent 60 years protecting. The drive back to Montana felt longer than I remembered. Highway after highway disappeared behind me until pavement turned into gravel, gravel turned into dirt, and the mountains slowly replaced office buildings. Every mile felt familiar, like memories were waiting behind every bend. When I finally reached the old ranch road, I stopped so hard the truck rocked forward. A polished black steel gate blocked the entrance. Not an old cattle gate, not something temporary. This thing looked like it belonged outside a luxury subdivision. Fresh concrete, fresh welds, electronic keypad, security cameras. And hanging right in the center was a laminated notice. Property access restricted. Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Unauthorized entry subject to immediate enforcement. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so ridiculous my brain refused to process it. Silver Creek Estates sat several miles south, or at least it used to. I climbed out, walked toward the gate, and rested my hand on cold steel. Somebody had spent real money putting this thing on Mercer land. Before I could even finish reading the notice, I heard tires crunching behind me. A white luxury SUV rolled to a smooth stop. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a woman wearing pressed slacks, polished boots, sunglasses even though clouds covered half the sky, and the kind of confident smile people wear when nobody's told them no in a very long time. She walked over without introducing herself. "You must be Ethan Mercer." "I guess I am." "I'm Vanessa Caldwell." She paused just long enough for me to recognize the name. "President of Silver Creek Estates HOA." "I'm afraid you've entered private community property." I looked behind me, then back at her. "I'm standing on my family's driveway." "Actually," she said, tapping a clipboard, "this roadway now falls under community oversight." Community oversight. I almost asked her if she'd practice saying that in the mirror. Instead, I folded my arms. "My uncle owned this ranch before your neighborhood even existed. Our updated development survey indicates otherwise." She handed me several pages covered with HOA logos, highlighted paragraphs, and legal language designed to intimidate people before they ever asked questions. According to her paperwork, my ranch had somehow become part of a newly expanded HOA district. There were compliance requirements, architectural restrictions, vehicle limitations, livestock regulations. Apparently my cattle violated neighborhood aesthetics. That one almost made me laugh again. You seriously expect me to believe cows need HOA approval? She didn't smile. We expect compliance. And if I don't, she pointed toward the notice, daily fines, property enforcement, legal remedies. I looked at the gate again, then back at her. You built this without asking permission. We didn't require permission. That sentence bothered me more than anything else she'd said. Not because it was true, because she believed it. People like that don't bluff. They convince themselves they're right first, then they convince everyone else. I stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. Show me one recorded deed giving your HOA ownership of this road. She hesitated, not long, maybe half a second, but long enough. Instead of answering, she flipped another page. Our engineering department completed an updated survey. I didn't ask about engineers. Silence. I asked for a deed. Her jaw tightened. That's when her eyes drifted toward the envelope sitting on my passenger seat, the estate transfer packet. My uncle's name was printed across the top in bold letters. Walter Mercer Estate. She noticed it instantly. Everything changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a tiny pause, a slight tightening around her mouth. The confidence she'd worn like expensive perfume suddenly cracked. You inherited the ranch. Yesterday. Legally recorded. This morning. For the first time since she'd arrived, she stopped talking. I didn't understand why then. I do now. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about that last name, Mercer. Apparently my uncle had spent years becoming the one person they hoped would never have a successor. She recovered quickly, forced another smile, and adjusted her sunglasses. Ownership changes don't affect HOA obligations. I don't have HOA obligations. You do now. I reached up, grabbed the violation notice hanging from the gate, and slowly tore it in half. The sound echoed louder than I expected. Vanessa's smile disappeared. I'll need another copy of that. You'll need another gate. She stared at me for several seconds before turning back toward her SUV. This isn't over, Mr. Mercer. No, I said quietly. I don't think it is. She drove away, throwing gravel behind her tires. I stood there another minute staring at the steel barrier. Something about that conversation bothered me. Not the threats, not the fake authority, the fear. I'd seen it for one brief moment when she read my uncle's name. People don't fear paperwork. They fear what paperwork proves. I climbed back into my truck and opened the estate packet again, reading every page while parked beside the gate. 820 acres. Original boundary descriptions. County recording numbers. No easements. No roadway transfers. No development agreements. Nothing explaining why an HOA believed they owned any part of Mercer Ridge. Before I could think much further, another vehicle appeared. This one wore county markings. Deputy Mason Doyle climbed out, tipping his hat the way old-fashioned lawmen still do around here. Ethan. Mason. Sorry we're meeting like this. He studied the gate for a long moment before letting out a slow breath. They finally did it. You knew. We've been getting complaints. So take it down. He shook his head. I wish it worked that way. I frowned. They installed a gate across private property. Civil dispute, he answered quietly, until ownership gets sorted out. I held up the estate paperwork. Ownership is sorted out. He looked through the documents, nodding slowly. This helps. Helps. You need your uncle's records. What records? Mason looked toward the ranch house sitting in the distance beyond the trees. Walter kept everything. He always figured this day might come. Those words stayed with me during the slow drive around an old pasture trail that eventually led to the house from the back side of the property. He figured this day might come. That wasn't something you said unless you'd been preparing for a fight. As I parked beside the weathered barn, I looked up at the old ranch house where I'd spent every summer growing up. For the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like someone had handed me the first page of a mystery my uncle had been writing for decades, and I had a feeling the answers weren't waiting outside. They were hidden somewhere inside that house. exactly where he'd wanted me to find them. The front door still groaned the same way it had when I was 12 years old, and for one strange second I expected to hear Uncle Walter yell from the kitchen that I was letting all the cold air inside. Instead, there was only silence. Not the peaceful kind either. The kind that settles into a house after someone has been gone just long enough for the place to realize they're never coming back. Dust floated through narrow beams of afternoon sunlight. Old photographs still hung crooked along the hallway, and his coffee mug was sitting exactly where he'd left it beside the recliner. I stood there longer than I cared to admit before finally forcing myself toward his office. If Mason was right, Uncle Walter had been expecting this fight, and knowing him, he would have left breadcrumbs instead of answers. That's just how he was. He believed people appreciated the truth more when they earned it. The office door was closed. That was unusual. He almost never shut it unless he was balancing ranch books or arguing with somebody over the phone. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The room looked untouched. Filing cabinets lined one wall, shelves overflowed with maps and old county binders, and his heavy oak desk sat facing the window overlooking the valley. Everything looked ordinary until I noticed a single envelope resting perfectly in the center of the desk. My name was written across the front in his unmistakable handwriting. Ethan, if they're claiming the ranch, open this first. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, this didn't feel like coincidence anymore. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded a short letter. Ethan, if you're reading this, then they finally crossed the line I knew they'd eventually cross. Don't waste time arguing with people who already know they're lying. Facts won't scare them. Proof will. Bottom drawer. Brass key. Trust the land before you trust their paperwork. Love you, kid. Walter. Taped to the back of the letter was a small brass key worn smooth from years of use. I walked over to the old filing cabinet, knelt beside the bottom drawer and slipped the key into the lock. It opened immediately. Inside wasn't money or jewelry or anything dramatic, just documents, hundreds of them, survey maps rolled into tubes, county correspondence, deeds dating back to the 1940s. Handwritten notes clipped to engineering reports. My uncle hadn't spent decades collecting memories. He'd spent decades collecting evidence. Sitting right on top was a thick brown folder labeled Silver Creek Expansion. Previous claims. I opened it. The first document was a professionally drafted land survey completed almost 30 years earlier. Across it, Uncle Walter had drawn thick red boundary lines with a carpenter's pencil. I stared at the map, blinking several times before it finally sank in. The entire Silver Creek subdivision sat inside those red lines. Streets, parks, clubhouse, decorative ponds. Every single house. I leaned back in the chair and actually whispered, "No way." Then I kept reading. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. There were county rejection letters denying expansion permits, notices informing developers they lacked legal authority to continue construction, internal engineering memos questioning property boundaries. One letter caught my attention immediately. Development shall not proceed without written transfer, easement, or purchase agreement executed by Walter Mercer. I searched through every folder. There wasn't a single signed agreement. Not one, which meant one thing. Somebody built an entire luxury neighborhood without ever securing the land they were building on. I don't know how long I sat there before headlights flashed across the office window. I looked outside. Vanessa's white SUV had returned. This time she wasn't alone. Two men wearing HOA badges stood behind her holding clipboards. I slipped everything back into the drawer except the survey map, folded Uncle Walter's letter into my pocket and walked to the front porch. Vanessa smiled, but it looked forced now. Mr. Mercer, after reviewing some internal records, we'd appreciate the opportunity to examine any property documents your uncle may have maintained. No, she blinked. Excuse me. No, I leaned against the porch rail. You're not coming inside. One of the men behind her cleared his throat. Failure to cooperate could complicate this process. I smiled for the first time all day. That's funny. From where I'm standing, I'm not the one with complications. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. We're trying to resolve an administrative misunderstanding. Then start by removing your gate. That isn't possible. Sure it is. Bring a wrench. For a second I thought she might actually lose her temper, but instead she glanced toward the windows, obviously wondering what I'd found inside. That tiny glance told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't looking for cooperation anymore. She was looking for damage control. We'll be speaking again, she said quietly. Probably, I answered. Next time bring a deed. They left without another word. The moment they disappeared, I loaded every important document into a waterproof storage case and drove straight into town. If those papers were really as important as they looked, they weren't staying in an old ranch house overnight. The county records office hadn't changed much over the years. Same faded tile floor, same wooden service counter, same woman behind it. Clara Whitmore looked up from her computer and smiled the second she recognized me. Well, Walter's boy finally came home. More like Walter's nephew. Close enough. She noticed the case in my hand. I'm guessing this isn't a social visit. I spread the survey across her desk. She adjusted her glasses, leaned closer, and slowly lost the smile she'd greeted me with. Where did you get this? My uncle's office. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she disappeared into the archive room and returned carrying several oversized county plat books. 20 minutes later, we were sitting beside her computer overlaying the old survey onto the county's modern GIS system. Every property line matched. Every coordinate lined up. Every street inside Silver Creek Estates appeared squarely inside Mercer Ranch boundaries. Clara removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Dear Lord, so I'm not crazy. No, she looked back at the screen. If these records are authentic, your uncle was right all along. Then why wasn't anything done? She sighed. Because counties issue notices. They don't always chase developers with bulldozers. Back then, everyone assumed ownership would eventually get sorted out. It never did. Apparently not. She opened another digital file. Here's the original expansion request. Across the top in bold red letters were two words, DENIED, reason, boundary conflict with adjacent private ownership. My heartbeat picked up. They built anyway, Clara nodded slowly. Looks that way. Does the county know? Officially, she looked at me over the top of her glasses. Not until someone forces them to look. I stared at the monitor, trying to imagine how many families had bought homes believing every document they'd signed was legitimate. Kids had grown up there. Birthdays had been celebrated. Retirement parties, Christmas mornings, all on land that legally belonged to someone else. Those homeowners weren't my enemies. They'd been sold a story just like everyone else. But somebody had written that story knowing it wasn't true. Clara quietly printed copies of several county records and slid them across the desk. Take these. Are they enough? Enough to make somebody very nervous. As if the universe wanted to prove her right, my phone buzzed before I even reached the parking lot. Unknown number, I answered anyway. Mr. Mercer. The man's voice sounded smooth, practiced, expensive. My name is Richard Hollow. I represent several development interests connected to Silver Creek Estates. Development interests. That was one way to describe it. Can I help you? Actually, I believe we can help each other. My client would like to make a generous offer regarding your recent inheritance. I looked down at the folder in my hands and smiled to myself. Funny how nobody had cared about Uncle Walter's ranch while he was alive. Yet somehow everybody wanted it now. I'm listening. I said, already knowing I wasn't going to like whatever came next. Richard Hollow let the silence hang just long enough to make his offer feel important. Mr. Mercer, I'd rather discuss this in person, somewhere neutral. I looked across the parking lot toward the county courthouse and couldn't help smiling. Neutral is a funny word coming from someone who represents the people who dropped a steel gate across my driveway. He gave a polite chuckle that sounded rehearsed. Misunderstandings happen. Not like this. Another pause. Name the place, I finally said. The Iron Spur Cafe, 30 minutes. When I walked into the cafe, Hollow wasn't alone. Sitting beside him was a man in an expensive sport coat with silver hair and the calm confidence of someone who had spent his life buying problems instead of solving them. Hollow stood first. Ethan, thank you for coming. This is Douglas Mercer Development Group. I raised an eyebrow. Mercer, the older man smiled. No relation. Pure coincidence. Somehow that made me trust him even less. A leather folder already sat on the table waiting for me. Hollow slid it forward. Inside is an offer well above market value. Cash. Immediate closing, no lengthy litigation. I opened it. The number would have changed most people's lives, mine included. It was enough to pay off every debt I'd ever had and never worry about money again. Then I kept reading. Buried several pages in was a clause stating the purchaser would assume all historical agreements affecting access, development, and prior land use. I looked back up. Interesting wording. Hollow folded his hands. Standard legal language. Except my uncle never signed any historical agreements. Neither man answered. That told me more than any explanation could have. They weren't buying land. They were trying to manufacture a paper trail after the fact. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Wrong answer. Douglas leaned forward for the first time. Mr. Mercer, do you understand what's at stake? I think I'm starting to. Hundreds of families. Families didn't weld that gate shut. His expression hardened. You could make life very difficult for a lot of innocent people. Funny, I replied. That's exactly what your clients have been doing to me. Hollow's professional smile finally disappeared. Litigation can last years. So can the truth. I stood, nodded politely, and walked out before either man could stop me. Halfway to my truck, my phone rang again. This time it was Clara. Ethan, you need to get back to the ranch. My stomach dropped. Why? Because somebody just filed 37 HOA violation notices against your property in one afternoon. I laughed once, mostly out of disbelief. 37. They've cited your fences, your barn, your equipment, your livestock, even the color of your mailbox. My mailbox. Apparently it doesn't match community standards. By the time I reached the ranch, bright orange notices seemed to be everywhere. One on the barn door, two on the corral fence, another taped to my front porch. Someone had even slipped one beneath the windshield wiper on my pickup. It would have been ridiculous if it hadn't been so deliberate. They weren't trying to enforce rules anymore. They were trying to bury me beneath paperwork before I buried them beneath evidence. I spent the rest of the afternoon photographing every notice exactly where I found it, documenting timestamps, locations, and close-up images. Uncle Walter always said angry people make mistakes because they stop thinking about tomorrow. Looking around my ranch, I realized Silver Creek had made a lot of mistakes today. Just before sunset, another truck pulled into the driveway. Deputy Mason Doyle climbed out carrying a folder tucked beneath his arm. Looks like they've been busy. That's one way to put it. He picked up one of the violation notices, read it, and shook his head. They're pushing hard. Why? Mason looked toward the distant rooftops of Silver Creek visible across the valley. Because people only panic like this when they're afraid something important is about to come out. I told him about the county maps, the rejected expansion request, and the meeting at the cafe. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a slow whistle. You know what this sounds like? What? Like somebody built an empire hoping nobody would ever check the foundation. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, painting the valley gold. From the porch I could see children riding bicycles through Silver Creek, neighbors walking dogs, porch lights beginning to flicker on one by one. None of those people knew what had happened 30 years earlier. None of them had hammered my gate into place or invented fake authority. They'd simply trusted the wrong people. That realization settled something inside me. This couldn't become a war against homeowners. It had to stay focused on the people who created the deception. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. Unknown number, 3 words, check your mailbox. I frowned, crossed the yard, and opened the old metal mailbox at the end of the drive. Inside sat a plain manila envelope with no return address. Just my name written across the front. I opened it carefully. There was only one item inside. A photocopy of an engineering map with several sections circled in red and one handwritten sentence across the bottom. They never wanted Walter to see this. I stared at the drawing, my pulse quickening as I realized the road layout didn't match the version Clara had shown me earlier. Someone had altered it before construction ever began. Whoever mailed this wasn't trying to threaten me. They were trying to help me. I looked toward the lights of Silver Creek glowing against the darkening mountains and understood something Uncle Walter had probably known for years. The biggest crack in a lie never comes from the outside. It comes from someone on the inside who's finally tired of carrying it. I slipped the anonymous map into my case, closed the mailbox, and headed back toward the house. Tomorrow, I wasn't just meeting with an attorney. I was going to find out who had secretly reached across the line, and why they had chosen now to tell the truth. If you've ever watched someone abuse power until their own actions became their downfall, let me know in the comments. More importantly, tell me this. If you discovered your home had been built on land tangled in a decades-old legal deception, who do you think should bear the responsibility? The developers, the HOA leadership, the county, or someone else entirely? I'd really like to hear where you stand, and if stories about justice, grit, and ordinary people refusing to back down speak to you, don't forget to subscribe because the next chapter only gets more unbelievable.